other than that, I guess let's just go ahead and jump into this. And if you're new here, we like to recap the episode first and foremost before we dive into our proper discussion of it. And we actually cut that recap out and host it separately on YouTube for your convenience. So if you find yourself just on the recap but want to hear our full thoughts, that will also be linked down in the description below. But without further ado, let's get into episode 13 of The Wizard, the Witch, and the Wild One of the Gentle Sea. So we pick up with the same moment of Ursulon swinging his sword to try and free Naram. Brennan, first thing he says to Lou is, describe what happens when Ursulon touches his breath for the first time in years. And he tells him that you're accessing something of yours from a realm that is eternal and infinite. And Lou describes that he feels a life, a joy, an energy that he hasn't felt in such a long time. And he kind of feels it like kind of cascading throughout his entire body. And he knows that this is not of this world, it is of his world. And so he swings the sword down, and this is awesome. Brennan says, you immediately become a level 2 paladin. After years of being asleep, you are awake again. And Ursulon now has access to his fighting style. He can cast spells, right, and he has Divine Smite. So this attack, Brennan describes as having Divine Smite on it. The spear that is pinning down Naram is shattered. Naram is freed and basically immediately like darts through the ocean like a missile, like getting out of the derrick.
Right.
Ursulon has completed his quest to free Naram, but now the cost comes due. Brennan has Lou make 3 saving throws that Lou can choose the abilities he wants to be for these saving throws, with the caveat that if he chooses his 2 strongest, then he must choose his weakest as the 3rd. But he doesn't do that, and he decides to do Charisma, Constitution, and Dexterity. He stands in the trap made for a god, so the DC on these is 23.
No big deal.
Lou then fails all 3 rolls. So because he failed the charisma, he is placed in this cylinder of anti-magic. No spells will work. Because he failed the dexterity, he is restrained within this cylinder of anti-magic, can't move. And finally, for failing the constitution, he immediately takes 3 levels of exhaustion. So the derrick is quite literally killing him.
Yeah.
Naram could heal faster than the derricks could hurt him. That's why it wasn't like a true like death danger. But this is not the case for Ursulon, and he is dying. Ursulon describes, or Lou describes, he is terrified, but the fear is quickly replaced by hope because he imagines Port Talon with no witchfires, with no derrick, and if him dying is what it takes for that to become reality, then this is a good thing, and he can accept that. Brennan describes it as, after many years of fear, you have found something worth being afraid of. We cut back to Ame now, who again is in this rowing boat with the Imperial ship kind of like guiding her back to the docks, and she can tell something's happened beneath the waves. So she tries to commune with, her witchly commune. She tries to talk to the sea, the barnacles, everything, and try to pick up on what's going on. The fox assists her, and she makes an insight check. It's described that DC 25, she'll know everything, perfect knowledge of the events. DC 15 to understand some stuff, and she gets a 20. So she touches the water, and she can sense Naram is free, swimming through the water, and she kind of is calling out to him in this moment. And because of that, Naram stops, turns around, and notices that Ursulon is trapped. And he says, "Oh no, little brother." And on the 20 from Ame, he has her choose. You can choose to have perfect knowledge of Naram's mindset, or you can choose to have some of Naram's, some of Ursulon's, and she chooses the latter. So she can kind of feel Ursulon accepting his fate and that vision of Port Talon that he has. And then she can feel from Naram this moment of crisis where he is frozen between 2 choices. He doesn't want Ursulon to suffer, so he knows there's 2 things here. He can free Ursulon via a path of destruction, or he can free Ursulon by path of sacrifice, permanent sacrifice, i.e. giving his own life. So Ame, sensing this choice in communicating with him, basically says, you know what, the balance of the world is in all things there must be balance, excuse me, and those that do not abide by the balance must pay for it. So she's essentially saying destruction, like the wizards deserve what's coming to them.
Let's go.
Whew. And Brennan describes that like some parts of you have been locked away by this curse that's affecting you, but you suddenly remember the words of Grandmother Wren. It's not a witch's job to make perfect choices, just right ones. So Ame,
Frickin' Brennan.
sends that out. Yeah, so good.
Frickin' Brennan.
So that message is conveyed to Naram, and Brennan describes the sea explodes. And Naram basically surges up from the depths of the ocean, and screams start to like erupt. He shatters the green gem that's atop the derricks, and his tendrils start to like latch out and grab onto the derricks, like crushing it in places. And wizards are going flying into the ocean. It's now that we swap to Suvi's perspective, who again is in Ursulon's room, having just mended the damage there. She's in deep thought about everything she's been through recently, and how, Ame and Ursulon, she can't be accountable for everything. Wild ones are unknowable, and witches cannot be controlled. So they can go off and do her thing, but she's going to stay here and, find herself. And it's at that point that Moro knocks on the door, and he's so delighted to learn that the sword of the Citadel is on the way. And as they're having this conversation, they can hear the eruption from outside. And through the window, they can see Naram and, him attacking the derricks. And Moro, like, instantly goes ghost white. He throws open the window, runs out, casts Fly on himself, and, like, bellows with some sort of, like, megaphone type spell that calls for all the wizards to make their way to the derricks that they're being attacked. Suvi, thinks this kind of feels right and is fitting, and she is not going to go help. She will watch quietly from where she is, and decides to actually go back to her room and just read her book. We cut back to Ame on the rowboat. The whole harbor has sunk like 40 feet because of the water receding toward Naram. The Imperial ship that was following her, fires cannons at Naram, but they do nothing to him. He just repels them easily. So Ame and the fox just watch. Cut back to Suvi, where Galani has now teleported into her room and is like, Suvi, okay, great. Like, I got to keep you safe. Stay in this room. Don't move. But we also have to deal with that thing. So then she leaves to go out toward the derricks as well. And Ame can kind of see her teleport to where Naram is, and she can see Galani. Brennan describes it, of course, beautifully, like pulling a rune off of her tongue, and it becomes a 4-dimensional object.
You captured it, don't worry.
Basically this really powerful spell, and flings it at Naram, who rolls a nat 1 on the saving throw, but Brennan uses a legendary resistance. And Galani begins yelling that, like, I am Aabria Galani of the Citadel, and like, we're going to deal with you. Here that we cut back to Ursulon, still under the sea, who can see that Naram has transformed back into his humanoid glamour, still in his giant form, though. And Naram can see Galani flying toward him. And he's just very disappointed and frustrated. And he raises his spear, which is like massive, and he's like tracing the horizon with it. And miles away, the ocean starts to rise like hundreds of feet into the air. And this moment was so cool. Brenna describes Galani like realizing her death is here, like death is imminent. And as Naram like swings the spear across the horizon, it's like going over Port Talon, like that's how big it is. And Galani like braces for impact, but he says, this is not you, child. And his attack is actually not on her, but instead this tidal wave that he has created crashes into the cliffs beyond Port Talon, and it floods the plains there, the plains where all the witchfire is. And Brennan describes that 100 soldiers are killed instantly as this flood just like rampages through the area. And with the witchfires out, now the vines and plants begin to grow, because Orima is essentially, has no longer chains on her.
Yeah.
And Naram says, I wish you nothing but the best, but I cannot say the same for my wife. Protect your city, wizard.
Yeah.
Galani, who now sees Moro like arriving at the scene.
Yeah.
She tells, hey, like turn back, the real threat is in the city, because Galani also telepathically messages Suvi in this moment, and Suvi tells her about Orima. Moro ignores her though, continues going out towards Naram, and it's here that Brennan has everybody roll initiative. Ame up first quickly scrawls an image of Orima into her boat and tries to commune with her. She says, hey, we kept our promise. Anything beyond this is just vengeance, not justice. But it's a very high DC persuasion roll, and she fails. Cut back to Ursulon, who now has to re-roll his saving throws from earlier. The DC has been lowered to 17, and the disadvantage from exhaustion is canceled out by Naram helping him. Ursulon fails them all again except for Constitution. And so he no longer is bound by the exhaustion stuff. And he insight checks Naram, who is like sorrowful for the lives he's had to take here. But Ursulon can feel that Naram almost sacrificed himself for him. And it's at this point that Ursulon's, from his perspective, deep underneath the ocean, just sees the derrick get ripped from the ocean floor and completely disappear from his sight, because Naram has grabbed it and literally hurled it out across the ocean, killing all the remaining wizards on board. And Naram then dives back under the sea and disappears beneath the waves. And that's where we'll break, and I'll toss it back to you.
The episode could have ended there, and it still would have been, this was like not even an hour, but maybe just at an hour, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's more that happens from here. Naram rips the derrick. Brennan describes like dozens, if not maybe hundreds, I think maybe dozens of mages who are on the derrick trying to control the damage, who instantly fall to their death. The derrick is cast aside, and essentially the next 30 to 40 minutes is each party member finds themselves in a isolated but in a different situation. Suvi, hearing the creaking vines of the kudzu racing towards the edge of Port Talon, she wants to go to the top of the chantry, where she finds like this thing that Brennan describes as like a command dais, and wants to basically tell the Azure battalion to retreat. We need to get to the wall. We need to protect the city. Brennan asks for a check. She does a persuasion check and has an amazing roll. And I think it was like a 14, but Galani had actually, not an amazing roll, 14, but Galani had like a help action with it or something, because she had already given the command to get to the walls. And Sergeant Laplow, with the message cantrip, is like, all the mages are continuing to where the derrick was. Like, can you help us? To which Suvi's like, sure. She comes down to the courtyard. Brennan describes like these white horses with black saddles that all of the soldiers in her jump on. They cast Expeditious Retreat, and they make their way to the wall. Meanwhile, Ame, seeing that the city's destruction is at hand, begins to want to create an offering of sorts for Orima right here on the docks. There's also like different bits of like food, like shipping containers that have been broken open. And there's people basically in a panic, where she basically is like, everybody like stay calm, and guides them to her to basically be like, hey, do as I do. Together, it was like a big old spirit bomb together kind of thing. Like, let's get together. I'm going to show you how to do this ritual, and together we can do a meaningful enough ritual that will stave off Orima. Going back to Suvi, they make it to the walls. The kudzu's actually already at the wall, and the Sergeant Laplow, in this epic moment, begins shouting orders before his life is snuffed out, as I wasn't sure if it was a vine that like whipped over the top and crushed his throat, or the hand of a strangler, as these creatures that we saw not just a few episodes ago begin to climb over the wall. One of which immediately grabs the throat of Suvi, does 5 points of damage. She only has 3 points left, And in this moment of, I guess, an attack on the town, Suvi basically uses her reaction to try to shield one of the nearby soldiers. And seemingly also in this, she wants to communicate like, hey, we're not your enemy. We don't want to fight you. And this act of selflessness seems to at least cause the strangler from continuing to crush her throat. I think Brennan describes it as like it releases its control. We go back to Ame. This is actually not quite in order of how it happened, but we go back to Ame. Brennan asks for a final check, explains, I think it was maybe like a DC 20. It was a very high roll. She rolled a 6 on the die. And unfortunately, the offering, Brennan describes it as there's too much chaos. There's too much panic for this to work. We go back to Ursulon, who's now free, and he finds Naram in front of him. Naram, who puts a hand on his neck and leans forward, forehead to forehead with him, and basically is expressing gratitude and says, like, are you, what was it, waybound? Was that the expression?
Yeah, like waylaid or something like that.
I don't know if this was from the children's story, or if this is the first time we've heard it, but basically he's referring to the fact that Ursulon cannot go home, that he's stranded here. And Naram basically says, if I had all the power in the world, I would do what I could to be able to let you go home. Unfortunately, I do not. And they share just this really beautiful moment before Moro from above, and seeing the derrick ripped out of the sea and thrown, all of his hard work wasted. He is wild with rage. He swears to destroy this creature. He creates a massive whirlpool. And as Ursulon and Naram are having this moment, the sea opens above them, and this bolt of lightning cascades down and crackles into Naram, dealing maximum damage. And then Moro and his fellow mages begin to descend down through the whirlpool, intending to either recapture or kill Naram. Ursulon, in an act of incredible selflessness, is actually going to swim up to try to meet Moro. And in doing so, despite the fact knowing that he's likely welcoming his own death, ends up colliding with Moro and trying to grapple with Moro. And Moro rolls a natural 1 and is grappled by Ursulon. And in addition to this, the concentration check, he fails the concentration for the whirlpool spell that he's casting. And in this freaking epic moment, the whirlpool closes in on Moro and his fellow mages. And that is where our episode comes to a close. Episode 13, a gentle
of the gentle sea.
I was like, a gentle touch, and I was like, that's not right. Of the gentle sea. Yeah. And by the way, remember, if you are watching just the recap, you can click the link in the description to see our full episode discussion and let us know what you thought as well.